We're continuing our series on the Gospel of Luke to Luke chapter 14, parable of the Great Banquet. 15 to 24, I think, were the verses for Sunday.
That sounds right. That's a couple days ago already.
Yep.
So
If you had more time, what would your longer ending have looked like?
if I'd had more time, I probably would hit a little bit harder how we can fall into the trap that the Pharisees fall into. Now Jesus was, telling this parable at the home of one of the religious leaders, one of the religious elites of the Jews, and he's kind of trying to make a point that that the assurance, that the confidence that the Pharisees and experts in the law had was a misplaced confidence and assurance. It was a confidence in their own works, their own ability to keep the law, and that was, of course, only based on their own standards and fell far short of God's standard. And in church today, we read about the Pharisees, the experts in the law, and it's always kind of, oh, boo, hiss, we know they're the bad guys. But, it's helpful to remember that in the eyes of the rank and file people of Israel, the Pharisees and experts in the law, those were the spiritual powerhouses. Yeah. And in our day, we've got plenty in our church, and churches have plenty of people who kind of like to consider themselves the spiritual powerhouses. And so I think there's some comparisons to be made, and I think the big point that Jesus is making is, hey, look, don't be spiritually complacent and don't be arrogant. Mm-hmm. I think Jesus wants us to have assurance. He wants us to have the assurance of salvation, provided that we understand that it's in the right place and that's in him alone. But at the same time, our salvation is something that is 100% God. And so we approach that. We should hold a perspective that is very humble with regard to this wonderful gift that, despite not deserving it, God has offered to us.
Now, we preached that gospel message, mm-hmm. that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, or I think we'll get into this in a minute, but the unconditional nature of election, that there was based on no prior condition of ourselves, not our own smarts or righteousness, yada, yada. Christ died for us. God chose us. God elected us. The Spirit works within us, whatever. We talk about that all the time. Why does that still not seem to connect for people? Why can we talk about that so often, but yet here we are saying, well, we make the same mistakes as the Pharisees.
Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with, I guess, Paul's evaluation of the old man versus the new man. What's the original sin? The original sin is the desire and the belief that we can somehow be like God.
Yeah.
We can put ourselves in God's place. And so when it comes to salvation, right? Hey, we're pull ourselves up by our bootstraps sort of people. We're independent. We like to be able to do things for ourselves, to earn things for ourselves. We like to be the master of our own destiny. And so I think that on this side of heaven anyway, we're always going to have to chafe at that desire for independence, sure, when we're acknowledging that we are completely dependent on God.
Yeah.
So it requires constant reminders. Mm. We do not orchestrate our own salvation. It's not, I made the decision to follow Jesus because I'm just a little bit smarter than the guy next door. It's we can't say that.
Right.
Can't say that.
Well, in getting to maybe what I wanted to get at, maybe the Great Banquet is a great way of explaining the 5 points of Calvinism. So if we'll have a really longer ending, maybe we could walk through them and talk about how the Great Banquet kind of articulates the doctrine for us or helps us.
Sure.
And I'll acknowledge at the outset that parables are really not great ways to build entire doctrines on. And so there's certainly other places to go. We're not building the whole doctrine on the Great Banquet, but it seems to be a really nice entry.
Yeah.
So if I asked you about total depravity, how would the Great Banquet demonstrate total depravity for us?
Well, total depravity is total, which means it touches every human being, right? But you could argue that from a human perspective, it touches on some more than others. It's evident in some lives more so than others, just with regard not to sinfulness, but with regard to being a victim of a sinful and fallen world. Okay, so in the parable of the Great Banquet, you have the kind of the A-list guests who, of course, as Christians, we acknowledge that they are totally depraved, just like anyone else is, but their total depravity on a daily basis does not affect them to the same extent because, hey, life is pretty good. Hey, we've got options. We've got a field to look at. We've got oxen, nice cars to drive around in. We've got people that think highly of us, even such that people want to marry us. Right? I mean, there's a lot in life that they can still enjoy. Whereas the people in the highways, byways, the alleys, I mean, these are people, total depravity is a daily reality for them. There's daily reminders of it. And so, yes, it's easier for them to confront their lives and say, yes, I am totally depraved. I am totally in need of some kind of outside help.
Total nature that applies to everyone of depravity is that who needs outside help getting to the banquet? Everybody.
Yep.
Nobody starts in the banquet.
Right.
Everybody starts outside the banquet. But then who gets maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Who gets an invitation to the banquet? Only the people in the alleyways? Everybody.
Everybody does. Yep.
So that's where I had really talked about or thought about irresistible grace. Is that these people who had no reason to say no, right? They didn't have an excuse. There was
There's nothing else in life that could possibly be more important than this.
There was nothing that could stop them from going to the banquet.
Yep.
Nothing precluding them. And that's the doctrine of irresistible grace. But what sometimes gets misinterpreted, like the issue of double predestination. Okay, so God has elected some people for salvation. Others, that must mean he's
elected others for damnation.
Right, he's elected others to damnation. But that's not what we find in the Great Banquet, and that's really not what Calvinists believe.
Right.
What we'd like to say is everybody receives the invitation.
Yep.
But to God's elect, it's irresistible.
Yep.
And the other people, does God say, you can't come because you're going to get married? No.
Right.
They say, I'm not coming because I'm getting married.
Right.
And God, in the words of J.I. Packer, leaves them where they desire to be.
Sufficient for all. It's only efficient for some.
Yeah. So we've kind of woven our way in a weird way through most of those doctrines. The last one is perseverance. That's kind of the point of the whole parable, right? Because you started with, what was the claim that the teacher made at the beginning? Blessed are those who
all who
enter the kingdom,
who are able to eat bread in the kingdom of God.
And there was supposed to be a normal response. You were saying,
response, may we be among those men of renown on that great day, something along those lines.
And so Jesus can demonstrate with this parable of the Great Banquet that there's going to be some that I compel to come in, and they're the ones who persevere.
And they're not men of great renown.
Right.
That's the other kind of sting in that toast, the completion of that toast. So that's and that has, I mean, you could weave that into preservation or perseverance of the saints as well. These people that are in, they have no ability to stay in by themselves. They do need to be preserved, and I have made accommodations for them to sit at my banquet for all of eternity.